Have you ever had someone treat your home like their personal playground? Imagine coming back from a long day only to find a complete stranger's car parked inside your garage without permission. Now what would you do? Call the cops, get a towed, or would you teach them a lesson? They'd never forget. Well, that's exactly what happened to me, but trust me, this wasn't just some simple parking mistake. This was full-blown entitlement at its finest, and the woman responsible, oh, she was the queen of entitlement. She thought she could walk all over me, ignore my warnings, and get away with it, but what she didn't realize was that she had just messed with the wrong person, and by the time she realized her mistake, it was already too late. Stay with me till the end, because this isn't just a story, it's a lesson in standing up for yourself, handling entitled people the right way, and making sure they never dare cross you again. Let's get into it. I knew something was off the moment I turned onto my street. It was that gut feeling, an instinct I had developed over the years that told me when something wasn't right. As I pulled into my driveway, my stomach twisted at the sight. In front of me, a luxury SUV was sitting inside my garage, bold as day, like it owned the place. The garage door was wide open, as the owner had proudly declared, "This is my space now." I hadn't even been gone long, just a couple of hours for a doctor's appointment, but in that short time someone had taken it upon themselves to invade my private property. My first thought was maybe it was a delivery driver turning around, or a neighbor's mistake, but when I stepped out of my car and got a closer look, I realized this was no accident. The car was parked too perfectly, too deliberately, right in the middle of my garage, as if the driver had taken their sweet time making sure it was just right. Even worse, the door was locked, and on the hood sat half-empty iced coffee condensation, still fresh, proof that whoever did this have been here just minutes ago. At that moment 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Who would do this? A stranger, a thief, a reckless teenager? The sheer audacity of someone claiming my space without permission made my blood boil. I wasn't just looking an inconvenience, I was looking at a blatant violation of respect, personal boundaries, and most important, leave the law. As a homeowner, I take pride in my property. I worked hard for this house, for my peace, for the security of knowing that my space is mine, and in one careless act, someone had trampled all over that. Without a second thought, now I had a choice to make. I could let this slide and hope it never happen again, or I could deal with this the right way and make sure it never happen again. I didn't have to wait long to find out who was responsible. As I turned to check the front of the house, there she was, walking toward me with all the confidence of a queen surveying her kingdom, sipping on a brand named ice coffee like this was just another casual afternoon. Karen, a name I had heard whisper by frustrated neighbors in past, but never had misfortune of dealing with myself until now. She was the kind of person who radiated entitlement, the kind who had probably gotten away with this kind of behavior for years before I could even speak. She cut me off with a most infuriatingly casual tone. "Oh, hey. Yeah, that's my car. Hope you don't mind. I needed the space." She said it as if she were asking for a sugar packet at a coffee shop. No apology, no hint of guilt. Just pure, unbothered entitlement. I blinked for a second. I thought maybe she was joking, maybe this was some kind of prank, but her smirk told me otherwise. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my tone control but firm. She took another slow sip of her drink and shrugged. "Yeah, your driveway is too slow for my son, and I didn't want to park on the street. I figured you wouldn't mind. You weren't using it anyway," she said it so matter-of-factly, as if my personal property was some kind of community parking lot that she had every right to use simply because it was convenient for her. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was practiced. She had done This before, maybe not to me but to others. She had a lifetime of getting her way, of bending the rules, of pushing past boundaries, because no one had ever truly challenged her before. And the worst part, she expected me to just accept it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a shouting match. People like Karen feed off a drama. They thrive when you get emotional, because it gives them a way to flip the narrative, to turn their wrong into your overreaction. So instead of snapping, I went for logic. Karen, this is my private property. You can't just park in my garage because you feel like it. That's illegal trespassing. And I need you to move your car now. For a brief second, I saw something flicker across her face, maybe the realization that she had pushed a little too far. But then just as quickly she rolled her eyes and scoffed. Oh, come on, it's not like I stole anything, it's just parking. You're making a big deal out of nothing. And there it was, the classic entitled playbook: dismiss, minimize, deflect. It was a textbook example of how people like her justify their behavior. It wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing was wrong, it was that they convinced themselves that their inconvenience was more important than your rights. I didn't let up. Move it now, Karen, or I'll have to take further action. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. Yeah, no, I have errands to run. I'll get to it later. And with that, she turned her back on me and walked away. I stood there stunned, not because I was surprised. No, this was exactly what I expected from someone like her, but because I realized something critical in that moment. People like Karen only change when they are forced to face consequences. And that's when I made my decision. Enough was enough. She thought she could dismiss me, ignore me, walk away without a single consequence. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I walked straight into my house, grabbed my garage door remote and hit the manual lock. The door shut and I bolted it from the inside, ensuring that no one, especially Karen, to get in her out. She wanted my garage so badly. Fine, she could have it now. I knew I had to handle this smartly. I wasn't about to do anything rash. I wasn't caring. I need to play this in a way that was both effective and legally sound. So before I did anything else, I documented everything. I took photos and videos of her car parked in my garage. I made sure the timestamp was visible. Then I did something most people don't think to do. I call my local police department's non-emergency line officer. I have an unauthorized vehicle parked in my garage, and the owner is refusing to remove it. What are my options? The officer on the other end listened, and after a few questions he gave me exactly what I needed. There were laws in place that protected homeowners from this kind of violation. And while I couldn't have the car tow immediately, I could take other steps to make Karen regret ever stepping foot on my property. And that was exactly what I was about to do. I knew that dealing with someone like Karen required more than just locking garage. This wasn't just about teaching a lesson. It was about making sure I handled things the right way, legally and strategically. The last thing I needed was for this to backfire on me. I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone and dialed a non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, I calmly explained the situation. I have an unauthorized vehicle parked inside my private garage. The owner is refusing to move it, and I need to know what legal steps I can take. The dispatcher took down my information and told me an officer would be sent out to assess the situation. That was all I needed to hear. In the meantime, I made sure to document everything. I took more pictures of the car, recorded a short video detailing the issue, and even walked around my property to ensure that nothing else had been disturbed. It was a precautionary measure, a necessary one, because if there was one thing I knew, it was that people like Karen loved to twist the truth. If she had the chance, she'd spin some ridiculous story about how I Was the one being unreasonable, but facts don't lie. Evidence doesn't lie, and I was making sure that when the authorities arrived I would be the one holding all the cards as I waited for the police. I consider my options. I could have called a tow company immediately, but in my state that wasn't legally allowed without a police report first. The best course of action was to let the authorities handle it the right way, because if Karen tried to escalate the situation, if she tried to claim that I had stolen her vehicle or damaged it, I needed the law on my side. This was a game of chess, not checkers, and if Karen wanted to play dirty, she was about to learn that I had already planned 10 moves ahead. I didn't have to wait long before Karen came storming back onto my property like a hurricane on a mission. Her heels clacked against the pavement as she stomped toward my front door, iced coffee still in hand, though now the cup was nearly empty. Her expression was one of pure entitlement and outrage, as if she had just discovered that her precious parking privilege had been revoked before I even had a chance to open my mouth. She started yelling, "Did you just lock my car in the garage? Are you insane?" She was livid, arms flailing, voice raised high enough that I was sure the entire neighborhood could hear. She wasn't embarrassed, she wasn't apologetic. She was furious that I had dared to stand up to her. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react the way she wanted me to. Instead, I simply folded my arms and said, "You parked in my garage without permission. Now we wait for the police to sort out." That stopped her in her tracks for the first time since this ridiculous situation began. I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The police, she hadn't expected that. She had assumed I would either give in to her demands or argue with her until she could manipulate the situation in her favor, but she hadn't planned for legal consequences, and that was where she made her mistake. "You're calling the cops over a parking spot," she screeched. I nodded. "It's not just a parking spot, it's my property, and you, Karen, are trespassing." The word trespassing seemed to hit her like a slap, because deep down she knew she had messed up, but instead of admitting it, she scoffed and crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous. You're being completely unreasonable." That was the moment the police car pulled into the driveway. As the officer stepped out of his car, I could see the shift in Karen's demeanor. Her arrogance wavered, her smirk faltered, but she still held on to that entitled defiance, as if she truly believed she could talk her way out of this. The officer approached us, giving me a polite nod before turning to Karen. "We received a report about an unauthorized vehicle parked on private property. Can you explain what's going on?" Karen immediately went into victim mode. She put on her most innocent expression and started spewing nonsense about how she had only parked there for a little while, and how I was overreacting. She even tried to make it seem like I was the one being aggressive by locking the garage, but the officer wasn't buying it. I pulled out my phone, opened the security footage, and handed it to him before she tries to spin a story. "Officer, here's the proof." The officer took one look at the footage at Karen smugly walking away after I asked her to move her car, and I could tell his patience was already thinning. He turned to Karen, his tone more authoritative now. "Ma'am, this is trespassing. Parking on someone else's private property without permission is illegal. I need to see your ID and registration for vehicle." Karen's jaw tightened. She knew she was in trouble. She tried to argue, but the officer shut her down. "You need to move your vehicle immediately or I'll have it towed, and if the homeowner chooses to press charges, you could be facing legal action." That's when the reality truly hit her. Her confidence shattered like glass. Her face turned red with frustration, but she knew she had no choice. With visible resentment, she fumbled for her keys, unlocked the garage, and finally moved her SUV out, but the humiliation wasn't over. As Karen soaked back toward her house, defeated, another car pulled up this time. It wasn't the police, it was a representative from the Homeowners Association. It seemed that word spread fast in the neighborhood, and Karen's selfish behavior had finally caught up with her. The HOA representative stepped out, clipboard in hand, and approached Karen before she could disappear inside her house. "Miss Karen, we need to have a discussion." Karen groaned. "Oh, come on, this is so stupid." But the highway wasn't playing games. They informed her that multiple complaints have been filed against her, not just for parking violations but for other entitled behavior around the neighborhood. This was a final straw. As a result, Karen was being fined and temporarily stripped of her community privileges. No more access to the pool, the clubhouse, or any neighborhood events. For an entire year she was absolutely fuming, but this time there was no argument left in her. She had lost. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse for Karen, her husband Greg arrived. He pulled into the driveway, looking confused and slightly irritated. He had apparently been out of town and hadn't been answering his phone. He walked up to us, eyes flicking between Karen and me. "The officer in the HOA rep. What the hell is going on?" he asked. Karen immediately tried to spin the story in her favor, ranting about how I had trapped her car and how the was being unfair, but Greg wasn't buying it. He looked at me, then at the officer, then at the footage I still had pulled up on my phone, and then in the most surprising moment the entire day he sighed and shook his head. "Karen, this is exactly we keep having problems." His tone wasn't angry, it wasn't even disappointed, it was exhausted, and in that moment I realized something. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was a repeat offender. This wasn't her first time pulling stunts like this, it was just the first time she finally faced consequences. The air was thick with tension as Greg, Karen's husband, stood there shaking his head in disbelief. Karen, usually so confident in smug, was now fidgeting, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as that she could physically shield herself from the growing mountain of consequences the representative didn't let up due to repeated complaints from your neighbors. And this latest incident, Karen, the board has decided that you'll be fined for trespassing on private property and violating community rules. Furthermore, your privilege is pool access, clubhouse reservations, and neighborhood of EMP participation. I'll revoke for 1 year. The words hit Karen like a slap. Her face turned an ugly shade of red, her lips parting in protest, but for first time she had nothing to say. She had pushed too far, and now she was paying the price. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe we're dealing with this again." That one word again was telling. This wasn't an isolated incident, this was Karen's pattern. She had been acting this way for years, entitled, selfish, assuming rules didn't apply to her, and now the entire neighborhood was fed up. Even Greg, her own husband, looked like a man who had finally hit his breaking point. The officer handed Karen citation and a stern warning. "Next time it won't be a fine, it'll be a court case." That was the moment Karen realized this wasn't just about me. She had lost the respect of her entire community. After the police and Joe, a rep, left, Karen stood in my driveway, arms crossed, jaw clenched, a storm brewing behind her eyes. It was clear she wanted to lash out, to scream, to somehow turn the tables so she wasn't the one in the wrong, but this time she had no ground to stand on. She had lied, trespassed, ignored warnings, and been caught on security footage. Every move she made had backfired spectacularly. There was no way out. I stood there, waiting, giving her the opportunity to do the one thing that could salvage at least a shred of dignity: apologize. I wasn't expecting much, just a simple Admission that she had crossed the line. But Karen was Karen, she allowed a bitter laugh, shook her head and muttered, "This is so stupid." Then without another word she turned on her heel and stormed back to her house. No apology, no remorse. Just entitlement and bitterness, refusing to admit she was wrong. And that was when I realized something important. Some people will never change no matter how many lessons they are forced to learn, no matter how many times the universe slaps them in the face with consequences. They will never take responsibility for their actions, and that's okay, because this situation wasn't about changing Karen. It was about setting a boundary, protecting my home and making sure she never tried to walk over me or anyone else again. Sometimes that's all you can do. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. I started getting more visitors than usual. Neighbors I had only exchanged pleasantries with the mailbox started stopping by to talk. They had all heard about what happened, Karen getting caught, the police involvement, the HOA fine, and they had stories of their own. One neighbor told me how Karen had once taken her Amazon package and claimed it had been delivered to the wrong house, even though the address was clearly correct. Another said she constantly parked in front of their driveway, blocking them in, as that their home was her personal overflow parking lot. And then there was an older woman from down the street who revealed that Karen had once demanded she move her car from a public space because she deserved it more. It was clear now Karen had been a menace for years. The difference, no one had ever stood up to her long enough for her to face real consequences. But now the floodgates were open. People were done letting her get away with it. The HOA announced a new rule: repeat violations of property trespassing would result in automatic legal action. They were setting a precedent, one that would make sure no one else pulled a Karen in the future. And just like that, the entitled reign Karen had enjoyed for years was crumbling in the days following the incident. Neighbors kept asking me how I handled the situation. So, well, people want to know how to deal with entitled individuals without getting into a screaming match or escalating things into a drawn-out, unnecessary war. And so I decided to share some key lessons that I had learned through this whole ordeal. First, always document everything. If you're dealing with someone entitled, chances are they're going to try and twist a story to make themselves the victim. Video evidence, photos, and written records are your best weapon. If I hadn't had security footage, Karen might have spun a completely different story to the police. Second, know the law and use it to your advantage. I didn't let emotions control my response. Instead of reacting in anger, I called the authorities, learn my legal options, and follow the right steps. People like Karen expect you to make mistakes out of frustration so they can turn the situation against you. Don't give them that chance. Third, set firm boundaries and don't waver. Karen expected me to cave and argue or let it slide, but by standing my ground, locking my garage, and refusing to let her bully me into backing down, I sent a message not just to her but to everyone watching: your property, your time, your peace of mind, they are worth protecting. And finally, understand that not everyone will change. And that's okay. Karen never apologized. She never admitted she was wrong, and that's fine. The goal wasn't to change Karen, the goal was to stop her from ever messing with me again. Some people need to learn the hard way, and she did. Weeks passed and the neighborhood felt different. There was a sense of peace, a feeling that a dark cloud had finally lifted. Karen, once the loudest and most demanding presence in the community, was strangely quiet. She no longer parked wherever she pleased. She stopped barging into conversations, making demands, or pushing her entitlement on others. And while she never outright admitted she'd been wrong, her actions spoke louder than words. One afternoon, as I was watering my lawn, Greg walked Past he hesitated for a moment before. Finally speaking, I tried to tell her this would happen maybe now. She'll actually listen. There was no malice in his voice, no anger, just a tired acceptance of a man who had spent years dealing with the consequences of someone else's entitlement. I nodded. Maybe, but whether she learned or not was no longer my problem. I had my peace, my space, and most importantly I had won without ever stooping to her level, and that was the real victory. This story isn't just about caring, it's about standing up for yourself in the right way. It's about understanding that entitled people will push boundaries until they're forced to stop. It's about knowing that calm strategic action always beats emotional retaliation, and most importantly it's about knowing that your space, your peace, and your self-respect are worth protecting. Because in the end, entitled people don't win, they just run out of people to push around.